This week, we find out what happens when I introduce a friend to a weird Godzilla movie for the very first time. Hello and welcome to another episode of the podcast edition of Echoes of Giant Monsters. I am your host, your buddy Slick. It is good to be chatting with you again. This will be a fast little intro because this episode is long enough, but I just wanted to say really quick, this can be found wherever you catch your podcast, naturally. It can also be found on YouTube, where there is plenty other additional content, and also can be found on Twitter, and I recently made a TikTok for all the shorts that go on YouTube and things like that. So if that is your jam, Echoes of Giant Monsters can be found in all those places. But anyway, what is this episode? So this is an episode, that's the first of what I hope to make a semi-recurring thing where I introduce a kaiju movie to a friend that has not seen it before and kind of get their instant reactions. And to kick things off, I did this with one of my oldest friends who basically has no real Godzilla knowledge or experience, or just isn't really into these this genre of entertainment. Not to say that they don't like this genre of entertainment, just not their thing. But I thought it would be fun to introduce this friend to Shin Godzilla and get his instant reaction. So, without further ado, let's just get right into it, shall we? All right, I'm here with my good friend, and hopefully soon to be your good friend, one Michael J. Aliens. Mikey
Hello.
Aliens, if you will.
Hello, everybody.
So you are part of the first episode of what I hope to make a episode here and there where I watch a Godzilla movie or another kaiju type movie with a friend of mine who might not necessarily be into kaiju movies or Godzilla movies, and kind of get their instant reaction. And thank you for being the first person in this experiment. I appreciate that.
This is truly an honor, and I'm happy to represent the layperson, Godzilla fan in perspective. So great to be here.
So let's set a little baseline. Not only are you a friend, I think, it could be argued by some that you are my best friend.
Oh,
and
we're jumping right into the sappy.
We are. We're getting right there. So, but I'm setting this up because we have known each other for probably 30-ish years now.
One could say that I've watched your love and lust of Godzilla bloom over the years.
But is it fair to say that it's very rare for me to ask you to watch Godzilla movies with me, right?
It is.
Yeah.
I think the last time you did that, well, we went to the movies and saw the
Godzilla King of the Monsters.
King of the Monsters, which was quite good. And prior to that, other than going to see one that was in theaters at the time, the last time we did this was actually watching Shin Godzilla, probably closer to 2016 when it came out. And I believe we started watching it at roughly 2 a.m. and I think I made it roughly 15 minutes into it before I was asleep.
Listen, it was as you just heard a beer crack in the background, that was the idea influenced by alcohol. And I said, you know what, but we have to watch this movie together sometime. And I think before I get more into that, I think it's also fair to say you were not a big watcher of Godzilla movies or anything like that. Is that fair to say?
Correct. And to set the stage for who I am in relation to the listeners today, kind of occurred to me, and I asked I offered to Slick to, do I call you Slick?
Yes, absolutely call me Slick.
Okay.
That's my government name.
All right. Well, I want to be compliant. So I asked Slick, hey, ahead of this podcast, maybe I should do a little Godzilla research and bone up a little bit. So I'm not such a noob on here. And he said, actually, the angle I'm going for is just that nothing and have you're just a outside perspective. Mm-hmm. So I'm honored to be the most ignorant blank slate mind that you could come up with. Thank you.
Well, so when I actually think about doing this, where I'm watching a Godzilla movie with somebody for the first time, I'm actually trying to tailor it to what I think of them as a person. And I think of you as you are a pontificator, you are an inquisitive soul, and I think Shin Godzilla is a movie that has layers to it. At least in my opinion, in my perspective, I think it has layers to it. I think there is symbolism to it that I think, even as someone who does not enjoy or does not regularly watch monster movies or things of that nature, could probably find things to appreciate. And so when I think of something that is like a deeper meaning and a deeper inquisitive type movie, I think of you. So I tailored this to you.
Look, they don't call me Michael J. Aliens because I'm down to earth, okay?
Oh my god, that's great. So before we get into the movie itself, I understand that you probably been exposed to Godzilla just by osmosis by being around me for multiple
Sure.
decades. But
Yes.
what are your kind of like preconceived notions or experiences with Godzilla, both as movies and as characters? And I think you've really only seen the newer legendary movies, and maybe legendary movies being the Bryan Cranston one, the
Mhm.
one that we saw, King of the Monsters, and I think you watched Godzilla versus Kong during COVID. I think.
Yeah, all the prior stuff I've heard you talk about it. I've listened to some podcasts. I think there's a whole world of Godzilla that I've never really delved into. I think about, and we mentioned this earlier, I was thinking about on my way over here, what was my first every kid has to have some sort of moment where some sort of monster character strike where that enters your life, right?
Mhm.
Where that's just a universally kind of monsters are cool, and who doesn't like a good monster? And for me, I remember being quite young and watching, I believe it was, you said, in 1933, what King Kong
Yeah. Yep.
in the old, and I'm sure I probably don't have to explain this to people listening. They probably know, but the old, kind of clay stop animation, King Kong fighting dinosaurs, and I remember ripping a brontosaurus's mouth apart, and being a little kid and watching that, and for how hokey and strange that is by today's standards, being blown away and just thinking that was the coolest thing ever. And so that delved me. That's not Godzilla, of course, but
Yeah. Yeah.
delved me into the monster realm. I'm trying to remember the first time I came across Godzilla, and I can't think of it, but I remember Godzilla pretty quickly replacing King Kong as the much cooler
Hmm.
monster.
Because I feel like I don't hear that often from like my friends who, you know, pretty much all my friends, like they don't really give a shit about like these Godzilla movies or Kong movies or anything like that. But it's like I do often feel like they kind of more default to King Kong, and but yeah, I always kind of thought Godzilla was the cooler of the two. I guess as a little kid, I think that's what attracted me more to. I always liked King Kong, but I think like Godzilla kind of being this like hybrid dragon dinosaur type character, just like for whatever reason, like just um was cooler in my mind. And he like fires just like atomic breath
Right.
and all this other stuff. So was that kind of the same? Is that kind
More
of where you're going? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's more layers there. I think there's more complexity to, yeah, how would you define Godzilla in terms of what is Godzilla's form? Part lizard, part dragon meets dinosaur meets, he's some ambiguous kind of blending of things. King Kong, no disrespect, he's a big gorilla,
Yeah.
right?
Sure.
And
Yeah.
he grabs a woman, he climbs Empire State Building. It's very American. It's a very American, like give the people what they want sort of thing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that, but I do appreciate a little bit of the nuance of in the you know the different kind of iterations of Godzilla. He's
Mhm.
just cool, man. I won't even try to fancify it a little. He's just cool.
Sure.
Fire
So
breathing lizard. What's not to like?
so even though, you have known me forever and I probably always have like probably stuck up for these movies and saying like, no, like they're, cooler than what most people think they are. Like what were your preconceived notions of Godzilla movies, prior going into this movie and the more modern movies? In the
Yeah.
sense, I mean, like, did you think they were campy, low budget, which they can be, but just what is your,
Um. No, I actually have kind of an inherent respect uh, as a Godzilla, very casual Godzilla fan. Um, I do think I've always had an awareness of the cultural relevance of Godzilla
Mhm.
to the Japanese people in society. There's clearly, I mean, he's lived on and on. You could probably try to make a parallel to King Kong, and it just wouldn't hold much weight compared to what Godzilla has been to It's just some kind of lasting power or whatnot. So I don't know about hokey or campy. I'm sure there's old versions that fit that description. I can speak most directly to kind of coming here and the thought of coming and doing this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And I had thoughts of what am I gonna, how am I gonna keep up? What do I offer? Which is yet to be proven even, but kind of a little bit of that little bit of self-doubt that comes with like, I'm so far from a subject matter expert. What am I gonna offer here? Now that we've just sat and watched Shin Godzilla front to end, I'm so jacked up to talk about Godzilla for this podcast. There's so much. There's so much.
So let's then get into it from there. So let's start broad. So what was your kind of initial takeaways from this movie? Or initial reaction, I should say.
Yeah. Well, there's clearly a commentary that evolves that involves Japanese government and bureaucracy, and probably the ineffective nature of layers of decision making, in that telephone tree. That came across pretty clear. I think, based on the timeline of the movie, there's probably some clear ties to Fukushima and things like that. And I kind of knew that going into it. Again, we had a little bit of some prior exposure to this movie at least. Beyond that, yeah, I think for this movie, without too much to compare it to, now I've seen some other Godzilla movies, but this one I think really, if you were to probably take a percentage of overall camera time on Godzilla versus on human beings in the dialogue trying to problem solve the scenario, it's very heavy on the human side. So I think there's really, and probably, I don't know if, this is a more common theme for Godzilla, but less just Godzilla porn for a better word, and a lot of layers that delve into obviously the Japanese government, bureaucracy, a bit of the kind of post World War II dynamic of the U.S.'s involvement and that whole dynamic,
Sure.
And even the kind of a bit of emerging individualism that comes in some of the characters there that have to take over after their kind of these the talking heads are kind of out of place. So yeah, there's a lot going on there. I think there's a lot to unpack.
So I think it's fair to say, as like a baseline, right? Like this is a movie with a lot of political commentary, and also just to kind of establish your knowledge. Like, you don't watch anime, you don't know who Hideki Anno is, you don't know what Evangelion is, like, so like you truly have like a pretty, like, you're going into this like pretty raw.
I'm vanilla.
And while I think there is certainly, this is a very like, I have this view where it's like when a movie like this, or maybe even something like Godzilla -1, stuff like that, where there is commentary that is directed toward, that's specific to like the Japanese culture. Like, I think we as Americans, we can understand and respect what they're going for, but I mean, that commentary is not really for us. Like, the granular level of that commentary is not really for us. But I think there is probably stuff that we can find that we can probably relate to, like in our own personal lives. And I think, I'm kind of curious to know your thoughts on, because I watched this, and I actually said this while we were watching it, is that like I've watched this movie like hundreds of times, tons of times. And but I've never watched it, like, I'm usually watching on my own, and well, I'm just usually watching on my own. So, but like now I'm watching it with you, who has not really seen many Godzilla movies, and I was like watching these scenes, going like, I was like, how is Mikey Aliens going to
for sure
take this, or how does this resonate with him? And there was like one point where I said, I was like, I bet there's like a lot that like we compare to like our own work lives that like is being talked about like in this movie.
Yeah. Well, to me, so I think consider any movie or anything you create a piece of art. And art should be, obviously there's some kind of built-in connotations and themes, but it's best left to the interpretation of the observer, and if it means something different for you than somebody else. So for me, definitely the direct government bureaucracy thing, that seemed like more of a direct commentary by the director. I also think that from a societal or from a societal standpoint, a person and any group of people, whether it's a corporation or any kind of, you know, when things get subject to that sort of thing, whether it's
There's many layers.
there's many layers. So whether it's groupthink or mob mentality, right? I think sometimes that the power and the fault of being a big group or organization or whatever you want to call it of people, it can bring out the best in what we are and it can bring out the absolute worst in what we are. And in this movie, it's pretty clear that there's, if nothing else, a lot of groupthink, right? I think the protagonist character from the get-go, Noguchi, was the only one willing to speak, right? And I think it was pretty clear that early on he was being wrist slapped verbally for saying things that were deemed to be just not in line, right? His colleague that reminded him to keep his statements in line and kind of inside the box. But don't forget who brought you in here.
He's a young person with young views, newer views, you know, kind of challenging this like established, we've been doing it this way for decades, you know, here you are, you know, who's here because like your father was also a politician.
Right. Yeah.
You know.
And to make it to be a typical American, having watched that movie and all the references, now I'll just fit right into the mold of to make it all about us. I look at our current government, and there's just that sense in general. There's a lot of that older kind of built-in kind of familial power, or just the old money of government, for lack of a better way to put it. And where our society right now, I think a lot of people, every time I get in any sort of political conversation, one of the themes is, can we just get somebody who's younger, more in tune with some of the things that are very quickly having more of a hold on our society, like technology, for example, right? As the key example. So yeah, I think, and that's where there are a lot of differences too with Japanese society. Is I called out earlier, you know, it's something I respect a lot from afar. Of Japanese society is much more of an us, a collective mentality than sometimes I think Americans, I think we can all agree, are much more of a individualistic kind of thing going on. So it was interesting to see that commentary seemingly being a bit scathing at this kind of collective groupthink in this more individualist coming up and making some calls throughout. They kind of get increasingly more, what's the word that they were using? Unilateral.
Yeah. And so that's interesting. That's there's a lot to unbundle there, right? There's a lot of like political commentary there, and let's put that to the side for a moment. So this is a pretty, you know, I think for me as a Godzilla fan, I would say this is a pretty radical take on Godzilla as a design and an evolution process and things like that. Like how, you know, what were your thoughts on like first Godzilla's like kind of weird like tadpole or whatever we were calling it, like that weird like Muppety like appearance he has at the beginning?
I like Muppet. Let's go with Muppet.
Yeah. What did you think of that, and as the design evolves like throughout the movie?
Yeah, I thought it was cool. There was something when it first emerges out of the water and onto land. It's got clearly it's in some sort of evolutionary stage, or it's not fully where it needs to go. And it has kind of a bit of an unsettling dead fish like look on its eye, if you will. I like that, and I don't want to jump right to the end and to tie it all together unless we want to go there.
No, this is a spoiler heavy podcast. So.
Okay, well then,
movie's been out for 8 years.
We're
doing spoilers.
If you haven't watched the full movie, now pause the podcast now. Yeah, I mean, at the end of it, let's just get right to the end, the very end. I just thought that
get to the end and work back.
Yeah, sure, why not? Let's dive right in. So here's my kind of my take on what the concept was of this Godzilla. You pointed out to me at the end. I kind of had a moment of like, what was that at the end? And
Sure.
I knew I saw something, but I didn't know quite what it was until you went back and rewound that
Mhm.
last panning cut of what was Godzilla's tail, the end of Godzilla's tail. You can see the spines, and then you can start to see these humanoid shapes and skull, cranial features, and other things. And then when you sit there and pause it and really look at it, you've got kind of these human Godzilla hybrid beings,
Mhm.
shapes, something emerging out of the end of its tail, along with some big cranial structure. And we saw it emit the radiation beam out of its
Yeah, talking
tail.
about the skull at the end of Godzilla's tail.
Yes,
Yeah.
which is really cool. And in my first take was just, wow, that's very out of left field and odd and cool and just ambiguously creepy, and just what a weird way to end it and leave you thinking,
Mhm.
what the heck was that? And then I kind of rewound a little bit. And it's like, what do we know about this Godzilla? We know that uh, in this film, Godzilla was seemingly an unknown entity, emerged from the water, and they were able to ultimately learn that there were some biohazardous materials in the water that either Godzilla either just quickly had learned to adapt to, evolve to adapt to the being exposed to that, or potentially feed off of it as part of its evolution. And so I think there was a concept right off the get go of it's a hyper adaptive
Mhm.
species, whatever it is, whatever it came from. What most defines it is one of the things that most defines it is that it is evolving on a much quicker scale to what it's exposed to. So it's exposed to radiation, radioactive materials. It learns to survive and thrive off of that and kind of become that. So then it kind of hit me at the end of the movie. Well, what has it now been exposed to throughout the movie? Humans.
Mhm.
And through that exposure, now you're seeing humanoid Godzilla human hybrids emerging out of its tail. Uh, Man, I don't know. That's cool. That's just
I've also heard theories, like fan theories, but like Goromaki, like the professor that commits suicide at the beginning of the movie, or well, you find his boat at the beginning of the movie after he's committed suicide. Like, did he jump overboard to where this radioactive waste was, and like, is he part of that? Like, that's like one fan theory I've heard.
oh.
I don't really get too much into it. I kind of just take the movie as it is. Um, but like there were like if you ever get into like the if you ever go down like the rabbit hole of like the concept art of like some of the far out ideas that were like kicked around potentially for this movie and how Godzilla would continue to evolve. Like there's like a flying form, there's like an angel form, like all these like sort of crazy ideas were kicked around. And I think, when I think of the design, I mean, you didn't ask me this, but I guess I'll just kind of get my little
Hey, it's
soapbox
your
and talk. But it's
podcast.
like there's something about this design where it's just like it's so like strange in the sense of like it's like the most probably the most unique Godzilla design I think there is, because I mean he's got this weird red glowing parts of him, like he almost kind of looks zombie like, but at the same time too he's like also like oddly familiar. And I've kind of said when I talked about this with like other people, it's like this kind of came out in the middle of the monsterverse kind of being in full swing and stuff like that. And it had been 2005 was the last time we got a Japanese produced Godzilla movie, and I still remember like the trailer dropped for Shin Godzilla when I was like at work, and I like just happened to like I watched it with my phone, and it kind of starts with this like classic Godzilla roar. And it was like as strange as he looks, it's still also like seeing my old friend for the first time in like 11 years.
Sure.
Kind of a unique take, but it's like I also like I try to avoid spoilers when I was going into watching this movie for the first time when it first came out. Even though Bandai, the toy company, kind of accidentally spoiled this the different forms of Godzilla before the movie released. But when I did get to see it, like that whole like first Muppet form thing, as we're calling it, like that was like shocking to me. And I've heard, and I think this is probably accurate, like he's got like the big eyes.
Mm-hmm.
So I think while the rest of his body grows, I think his eyes remain the same size through all the forms. So when you finally get to that
Hmm.
final form, those big giant eyes the Muppet form had kind of grew into the head of the final form.
Ah.
I don't know if that's like confirmed, but I've read that in a couple places, and I kind of like that, so I'm going to kind of keep with it. So
Gels.
so let's pivot a little bit to how this compares to, like, in Japan. This was, I guess we'll say this was like the equivalent of like a Japanese blockbuster movie. I don't think that's like a one-to-one translation to like Hollywood blockbuster movie, but
Mhm.
um how do you think, especially like when you go back to the mindset like 2016, how do you think this compares to the tropes and things we've seen in like American Hollywood blockbuster movies? Like, was there a thing like, and this is my setup for this. Like, there was one point where like you asked if Kyoko and Patterson and Yuguchi, like oh, like you made a joke, like, oh, is it going to be like a budding romance between the two?
Mhm.
I feel like in a Western movie, yes, there would have,
Right.
but there's not
Right.
in this. They're
Right.
just really keeping it political.
Yeah.
And so I guess using that as like a primer, like were there other, for lack of a better phrase, tropes being subverted as you watched this from what you're used to seeing from Western movies?
That's a good question. Well, so to work off of that, I think my take on that would be, and maybe all right, I don't have to give disclaimers. This is my take.
Just your takes.
Yeah, in American movies, there would have to be a budding love story there
Right.
because, again, I got to do it. I got to say, like, I don't think that Americans wholesale can commit to a movie about just the collective without a focus on a protagonist's direct, a direct payoff for some character that represents the viewer or
Mhm.
something closely relatable to the viewer. Where in this, my understanding and my take on Japanese culture is that might almost just be completely outlandish to try to inject a love story into that because this is such a societal, such a communal problem that how could you focus on your individual? How could love bud during that because they're so focused on the broader, greater good? Whereas I think even in like there's a giant monster that is just making its way through New York City and just destroying everybody. Let's make out, right?
Right.
I think you need that in order, and I think it speaks a little bit to just some of the cultural and individual differences of, who the viewers are there. Again, Godzilla's got such a influence on culture, and I don't know. I don't know.
Well, I think what you said there actually inadvertently touched on something that I was gonna raise with you in this discussion. So, what I've often heard is like a critique uh, thrown at this movie is that we don't know much about the character. Like, we don't know much about the backgrounds of the characters. And I've always kind of said one thing that I really liked about this movie is that, like, and I think you were kind of touching on this, is that like, well, if you were dealing with this situation, you wouldn't stop to give like your, like, to tell like the person next to you like what your childhood was like, or what like
Mhm.
your undealt with like childhood trauma was, or what your odd motivations were. You're just like, well, no, like we're dealing with a crisis, like this is just what we gotta do, we gotta work, you know what
Right.
I mean? Like, and I like that this movie does that. And I've often heard, um you know, particularly on like the, well, I shouldn't single out like Western audiences, but just in general, like I've heard like articulate, well, we don't know much about like, these characters. Like, I'm like, well, it doesn't make sense for them to stop and go, hey, let me just like give you like an exploratory dump on like my life. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
have you seen Kong Skull Island, which was like the Kong movie in the MonsterVerse prior to
Jack
Godzilla?
Black, was that one?
No, that's the Peter Jackson one.
Okay.
No, the one that
No,
came out, the one that came out after the 2014 Godzilla.
I don't think so.
It has what's his face from Step Brothers, who's not Will Ferrell.
Oh, yeah. John C. Riley.
Yeah, so that's actually a really good movie.
John C. Riley.
But it also has Loki from, I don't know anybody's names, but like it has Loki from the Marvel movies, and it has Captain Marvel from the Marvel movies. And there's like one random scene in that movie. Also, it has Samuel L. Jackson and John Goodman. It's actually a pretty good movie. You should check it out. But there's like
Casting's A+.
it's legit. It's a very good movie. But there's like one random scene where, because again, I don't recall anybody's names, like where Loki from the Marvel movies and Captain Marvel, like they're having this like random discussion about like this like lighter that like is important to one of them, how it's like, whatever, like their fathers, their mothers, whatever, but like before they died. I remember sitting there going, I was like, why are you doing this? This is not how like normal people would behave.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, but that's like, I think to your point, like that's like the Hollywood movie. You need this like, even if it's so unnatural, like you need these scenes for the audience. People just going like, yeah, like here, let me just tell you about this like undealt with trauma that I have.
Right.
And it's going to be this like weird, like, Chekhov's lighter. I'm going to tell you about the significance of this lighter, which is then going to be used like, 20 minutes from now.
To make this whole greater crisis more directly relevant to me, one singular character. Yeah, to me, that's one of the, I might be just beating a dead horse here. But that to me was one of the most noticeable things is in a Hollywood movie version of this, and what we've seen, I've seen the American version, multiple American versions of this. You get all the Godzilla fighting porn aspect of it, which is great. Who doesn't like that?
Sure.
But then you're more tethered directly to a character, right? Or a couple of characters, and it's a little bit too, it's very individually focused. I won't make commentary on if that's good or bad. That's just what it is.
Yeah.
And
your mileage may vary, as they say.
Right. And in this movie, what rings true is that, I don't think they felt the need for, assuming they're more focused on a direct Japanese audience, to get too in the weeds with any individual character, because what's going on is, I think as they would see it, way less of an individual thing, and it's more of a shared societal thing, and I think it's representative of how historically their culture thinks and works. The only exceptions to that in the movie that I can think of are the little political backdoor injections of hey, if you're going to be prime minister, just at least make me don't forget about me here. And I think that's probably more deliberately placed in there as a commentary to maybe what they're some of the things.
But is that also unrealistic?
No, not at all.
Yeah, right.
No.
So putting aside the how you would interpret it, how another audience would take it, but more taking it back to you personally, did you like that more style of storytelling than what you would normally see in a Western movie?
Totally. Because you want to talk about tropey. That's what's tropey to me, is when you have, I think it speaks to the scale and the gravity of what's going on here. And I think everybody, to some extent, you equate it to, what would this be like if this really happened?
Mm-hmm.
And in this movie, it was, I don't know, you were able to, it lived in that realm of this broader, it's a big thing, the casualties happening, the destruction, the everything. And when that's going on, personally, I don't necessarily want to be dragged in the direction of, let's make sure we deviate from this grand scale of casualty and destruction to focus on the impact of this old stopwatch that I carried.
Right.
My grandfather had in his butt for whatever it might be. So no, that I like, and it's one of the things I think I've said it before this in general, from a very at a very face value. It's something that I respect about Japanese culture. However relevant or irrelevant this is, I remember seeing photos from the last World Cup of all the different locker rooms when teams lost and were eliminated, and there were locker rooms in disarray. And it showed the Japanese locker room, and all of their cleats and their clothes and towel and everything were neatly folded by the players before they left. And pros and cons to everything, but I think one of the pros to that sort of mentality is that everyone's doing their part for the greater good, and not getting lost in the me, sort of thing. So probably a bit of a deviation, but I like in this movie that I probably would have found myself, you've got Godzilla, you've got all this stuff going on. Do you need a love story? Do you need an individual, come up and or whatever? No, in my opinion, no. Deal with the scale of.
See,
Godzilla.
You took this as your interpretation of this is like a broader message of like collectivism and coming together for a greater good. And
I don't think deliberately. I don't think that was a deliberate thing. I think that is just as an American.
But that's what you took away. That's your
as an American watching this. To base it in simple terms, any Hollywood version of this, I don't think that flies in the States, because I think the people at the studio would look and say, we need a protagonist who's we got to get in their backstory, and they need to come full circle, and there needs to be this sort of it needs to be brought back to some individual level. And I just don't think in this version they felt the need to do that at all. I like it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't think neither of us are experts or know much. Like we're not Japanese people. Like we don't know the ins and outs. We're not living in that society. Like we don't know the finer points of like these messages that's trying to make. I think it's very interesting though how we interpret this, like as Westerners, and like it could be right, it could be totally wrong, but it is interesting to me, like kind of hearing this when you like how like this creates an image of another another country, and like this is a movie with a political message and how we are interpreting that political commentary.
Right.
I think that's why I kind of picked this movie for you, because I feel like it would get you thinking, and I think it would lead to like an interesting conversation where we could be way off base, or we could be, I don't know, maybe not so off base.
Again, art, eye of the beholder, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I could be way off. If the director was sitting here, he could look at me and shake his head and say, "What a completely disjointed view of that movie I created."
He would,
but it still means something.
He would probably say the famous line from his anime, "I'm so fucked up." But anyway, like, so shifting gears, but I want to keep with the comparison to, this movie to Western movies. So I kind of said to you, off the top of my head, I don't recall what the exact budget was for this movie, but like, let's say it was somewhere between like, I don't know, like not more than like 15, $20 million, right? And so we are talking about, the most recent Godzilla movie came out, Godzilla X Kong, the New Empire, which actually had the lowest budget of the MonsterVerse, but still had $130 million budget. The other Godzilla movies in the MonsterVerse have had north of like a $200 million budget. I told you before we were recording, you haven't seen Godzilla -1 yet, but like that is also another Godzilla movie.
Which now I'm just completely jacked up to see that.
Hopefully soon, if it gets released in a way that we can see it. But another movie that had about a $10 million budget. So, I mean, I'll say right off the bat, the CGI in terms of what we can do with Hollywood movies, like, it's not necessarily, it's not always on par, but I still think it's extremely good for what it is. But I'm curious to know what your thoughts were on the CGI effects in this movie.
Yeah. I thought they were good. I thought they were good to quite good. I wouldn't.
Does the budget make you appreciate them more?
Yes,
I guess is what I'm getting
at. Absolutely. Yeah. I'm trying to think of. I said something to you prior about. I've always been, in general. I mean, up until more recently, we're on this exponential kind of scale of evolving CGI abilities, but. I've seen movies fairly recently where I'm like, man, the CGI of this like fully funded movie, it leaves a lot to be desired.
Probably a Disney-owned property, or
right. And then I watched Jurassic Park from 1993, 4, and I'm like, those are real dinosaurs. They found real dinosaurs to run around in this movie, so I don't understand how that happens.
I think there's a lot of crunch in like on the Hollywood side of things, like just like making these studios churn shit out in like tight deadlines,
which is what a waste. Take your time.
It's like interesting if you watch like a I even say like you watch something like Independence Day, but like going up to like maybe if you watching a movie like that's CGI heavy from like 2005 like 2009, CGI is like actually like really really good. And then it's like over the past like 10 years in the Hollywood movies, like, you just see this like regression.
Yeah. What a weird thing, right? Like, why would you regress?
Crunch.
Crunch. Well, I guess that's it. I'm trying to think of the movie. Actually, I know the movie that I went and saw in theaters that actually blew me away from a CGI perspective. And this is where I'm going to fail to remember the specific version of of the Apes. But one of it was like
The newer ones,
the
anyway.
newer Planet
Yeah,
of the Apes. It was like the second one, maybe the third one. I think the second one.
I haven't
That
seen really any of the new ones, but they look really good. I would like to. I would like to get.
there are some scenes in that where they're kind of like they're going to war, right? And you've
Mm-hmm.
got fields of apes running into, and for just the majority of that movie, of the CGI in that movie, I was just, making comments while I was watching. I was like, this is pretty indistinguishable from reality. It just, and there's as somebody that doesn't work in the field, the best I can say is that there's just some sort of intangible nature, even when something looks like it was designed the right way. There's just a way that it does or doesn't fully integrate in that full three-dimensional sense to its surroundings. And
Mm-hmm.
I feel like most of the time it doesn't. Every once in a while I go, wow,
Mm-hmm.
that's really good. And obviously there's AI stuff coming out now, even from a video standpoint, that
Yeah,
has a ways to
but it
go.
wouldn't
But
be in these movies that we're talking about.
no. But it's just, to me, it's interesting where it will all go, and universally the doors it can open up, and what it could do for Godzilla. But that said, up until, I mean, even still now, I look at, there's some probably campy, but 80s, a fan of like 80s horror movies. You want to get into the horror stuff, and a lot of creepy things. The 80s was so good because it was physical, tangible,
Right,
animatronic,
right, right.
creepy stuff.
All the practical
Where
effects.
now
Yeah.
there's so many more modern movies that go for that scary thing, and what supersedes the scariness to me of that thing that pops out or whatever is the fact that it is clearly a computer generated image over everything you've watched up
Sure.
until that point being,
I think there was a lot of motion capture done for Shin Godzilla. Actually, the guy who did the motion capture for Godzilla, like he actually wore like a Godzilla mask and like had like a replica tail on, but he put the mask on to like really kind of like immerse himself like in the motion capture. And then like you see that in the MonsterVerse movies. Like the earlier MonsterVerse movies are all motion capture, whereas starting with Godzilla versus Kong, they become a mix of just pure CGI, a mix of motion capture. But I think the motion capture, like this movie does for most of it. I think that does bring like a sense of realism to it. Like there's like one scene in this movie when Godzilla's in his like kind of final form and he first makes landfall, and they kind of like pan up from like his like wrist like up, and it like kind of like wobbles like, in a way that's almost like the first time I saw it in the trailer, I thought that was a guy in a suit
mhm.
because it wobbled like the way the hand wobbled was like so natural. But it's again just like motion capture with like CGI
Sure.
over it, and I think that does kind of bring a sense of realism to it. And you know, I don't know why that's not utilized more. I mean, I'm sure it's more efficient to not have motion capture, but I feel like the end result is so much better. But I don't know. I guess if you're making hundreds of millions of dollars off these movies, like you're just gonna cut corners, right?
Sadly, that's probably right. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I mean, overall, this one, it checked the box. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't. There wasn't any real tangible moment I could think that I was looking at it and focusing on.
It wasn't a distraction anyway,
No,
right?
it was not a distraction. No, and the preview you showed me of Godzilla -1, man, I'm
Soon, Mikey Aliens, soon.
yeah.
So, was there anything about this movie that didn't work for you, or maybe, or I shouldn't say didn't work, but like, were there anything that like any critiques you had about this movie?
I had to go for one. I think the most obvious one would be. I mean, there's some really cool shots of Godzilla. The overall ratio of um,
Godzilla to humans.
human response and human interaction to Godzilla. I mean, I think most people would always vote in favor of let's
Sound
inject
a
a
little
little
more
bit more
Godzilla, yeah.
on the Godzilla side, but there's also something to be said for the tactfulness of not going too heavy in that, right? Trying to think of I don't know. I'm a big fan of The Exorcist, right? Sorry, this is not the best direct
We're gonna
comparison.
wait and see how we get there.
but I like the tactfulness and in the Exorcist, the build up to it, right? It's not,
Mhm.
towards the end of that movie, there's a sharp exponential turn to where all of a sudden the payoff is all at the end there, but leading up to it, that building process is it feeds into what makes the end
Sure, yeah.
so disturbing and creepy and stuff. And you know, this had a little bit of an element to that. Maybe not because it wasn't like fully at the end, but I do like the tasteful kind of don't just. I think again the American version of this would be like to show about 10 times more Godzilla CGI, just
Yeah, yeah.
fire breathing through buildings and killing humans and stuff, which is cool. But you got to respect the Japanese have a more nuanced touch.
Sure.
So
My view has always been human scenes give meaning to the monster scenes.
uh-huh.
You know, like, and yeah, you can do it in a way where you have less humans and more monsters, and it's still meaningful. But I do think human characters give meaning to the monster scenes, right? It's like baking a cake, and the monster stuff is your frosting on the cake, but the human stuff is the cake. It's like it's the cake, and you have the good stuff on top, and it gives meaning to it. My one critique of this movie, and this for me personally is always, I always kind of consider this movie to be like one of the top Godzilla movies to me. It's actually been a while since I watched it, and I was actually kind of wondering. I haven't watched this movie since Minus One has come out, which, like, I mean, Minus One might go down as arguably the in the grander scheme of things, probably considered to be the greatest Godzilla movie of all time, and
Oh
also
man,
borderline could be considered the most important Godzilla movie of all time when you outside of the original. Now, I mean, I have other movies that I consider my favorites for like nostalgia value, but like Shin Godzilla has always kind of been the top for me. And it's been a while since I watched it, since Minus One's come out, and I was like, no, this movie still holds up. It still has a
yeah.
lot of impact. It's still like I'm introducing it to you, and it has clearly had a positive impact on you. I think as a movie
I
watcher,
see
as
my
a
life
fan.
as before watching Shin Godzilla and after watching Shin Godzilla.
And they go, no, this movie hits on like a lot of fronts. You know, it's crazy to me. Like, I mean, I've been to Japan twice in the past 10 years, and the first time I went 10 years ago, like in 2014, like that the first American Godzilla movie or the newer American Godzilla movies, like wasn't really out yet, and that wasn't really even that big of a hit like in Japan. And it's like when I went to Japan that first time, it's like it was kind of hard to find Godzilla stuff in Japan the first time I was there. And there was a Godzilla statue in a square in Tokyo, and it was kind of based off the '90s style Godzilla and stuff like that. But when I went back to Japan this past year, now we have the MonsterVerse in full swing. We're living in a post Shin Godzilla universe, which was a big hit both in Japan and worldwide. And Godzilla now is just like such in the mainstream right now, like probably at a level that like he's never been. And when I went back to Japan last year, it's like Godzilla was just everywhere. It was like I could throw a stone and hit something Godzilla related. He's on the side of vending machines, and the square where they used to have like the '90s Godzilla statue, they moved that statue to Toho Studios lot, which is the studio that makes the Godzilla movies, and they replaced it with a giant Shin Godzilla
Did
statue.
they?
And there's like a restaurant built around it, and there's Toho has like a movie theater there, and it's odd to me that like Shin Godzilla had for a long time, basically since 2016, became like the face of Godzilla because he looks like a zombie out of hell or something like
Mm-hmm.
that. He's a deformed Godzilla. I think with Minus One, I think that's going to probably become the new face of Godzilla. It seems like that's what it's designed to do. But it's just wild to me, like the difference like a decade makes. Like it doesn't feel like it's been a decade, but like this was the face of Godzilla in outside of the US for pretty much the past decade. Like there are amusement park rides that are based on this Godzilla. Like there's a million toys and figures you can buy, and like I said, a giant statue in the middle of a square in Tokyo, like dedicated to this style of Godzilla, which is funny to me because like he looks like right. Like, I mean, he looks like something horrific, doesn't he?
Yeah. Well, what's part of what's interesting about that too is this was a clear deviation from the we talked about the kind of chronological progression of Godzilla movies that reference the prior ones, and
Mhm.
it's a kind of lineage of movies. And this was a one-off. They kind of came up with their own, concept, and it's interesting to me that clearly that's been accepted and embraced by their
Mhm.
culture and not seen as I wouldn't be surprised if some saw that as a non-purist take on things and whatnot. So that's interesting. You know what I'd love to do right now is actually turn the tables a little bit. You said that I could ask you some questions,
Sure. Sure.
and I think for your listeners, they as much as they've clearly enjoyed hearing from my layperson perspective, they're probably more looking to hear from your perspective on things.
Sure.
So for starters, before I ask you a question, just a general call out, being an audio only podcast for anybody listening, uh, I think it would be a disservice to not mention the setting that we're in right now and what that is like. And maybe you've covered this before.
No, no. But we are in the collection annex, right?
We are panoramically surrounded by about every type of Godzilla figurine, combined with some other flavors of things, but mostly Godzilla, that you could probably imagine. And this has been, again, we go back a long time. I can think back to 30 years ago.
Approximately,
Not
yeah.
not
Yeah.
to age ourselves, but I just did. And you had Godzilla stuff back then,
Mhm.
and to see this, I mean, it really is a sight to behold. So I don't think anybody listening to this podcast doubts your subject matter expertise, but man, if they could see what we're surrounded by right now, it would your cred would go up.
This is the overflow room. This is the
Yeah,
overflow room.
yeah, yeah. So this is not all of it. It's pretty. It's put me into Godzilla fever just being sitting in this room. There's literally a Godzilla figurine holding my microphone right now in front of my face. So that's awesome. All right, I'm gonna go right in with. I'm gonna. I just going right for the kill. Rank Shin Godzilla all time.
Probably top 5.
That's
Personally. Probably
that.
top 5 personally.
That's.
Maybe like top 7 slightly, but
Hmm,
top 7 though. Well, there are some that I have nostalgia value for
sure. Yeah.
that um so but I think this is a Godzilla movie you can show to non-fans who will appreciate like my wife has only seen like 3 Godzilla movies, and I think they're the ones that like you can show to non-fans, and I think this is like one that I felt very like comfortable. Like my friends who aren't into Godzilla, like, I can show this to them. I think that makes it such a good Godzilla movie, but also as a personal enjoyment factor. Like, I mean, I just love this movie, and it's like I said, like
Hmm.
I'll never forget the moment when the trailer dropped for this movie, and I was at work, and I got word that the trailer was dropping, and I stepped away from my office, and
You quit your job in that moment.
that's not true. It's
Ran out the
been that
door.
job ever since. but I just still remember the trailer for this movie is so good, and a thing that I mentioned to you when we were watching it. A lot of the sound effects are reused from older Godzilla movies,
Yeah.
and like the trailer starts with one of the Showa era Godzilla roars from I think it's probably from King Kong versus Godzilla in 1962. But like either way, like when that roar hits, like it was like again, we hadn't had a new Japanese Godzilla movie in so long at that point, and I love the MonsterVerse. It's a lot of fun. It scratches a different type of itch for me, but like when I heard that, it was like again, seeing my old friend for the first time in a long time. And I'll never forget the moment of that trailer dropping, and the movie lived up to that trailer. Um, my only real critique of this movie is I think the third act is a little long in the tooth. I don't
Sure.
think we need to
Sure.
see every little bit of the coagulant being built. I think I could easily cut. I could probably cut 7-8 minutes from the third act, and I think we'd have a little bit more of a streamlined movie.
I
But
disagree. I'm going to go home
that's
and build my own coagulant now that I know.
just, um, so yeah. I don't want to step all over your questions, but this is a top notch one for me.
Okay. How would you describe what defines this Godzilla compared to others, or what its legacy is in the series?
Like you mean like in the terms of like character and lore and stuff like that?
Yeah,
I guess
what's its most defining trait in the broader
sure,
catalog?
sure. So I think from a movie standpoint, you know, I think this again, there's a lot of Godzilla movies, right? There's 37, 37 movies now. I could be slightly off that, but there's
Fact checker
there's
on it.
close to 40, and there's multiple anime series now and stuff like that. Like so, but this is one of the movies that again takes Godzilla back to being like a symbol for something more important. Not that it's bad when he's not a symbol, but I mean like this is again Godzilla goes back to being a representation for something.
Mhm.
And I think it's great that we live in a time that we can get the superhero Godzilla from the MonsterVerse movies, but also that we can have movies like Minus One or these anime series that you're not familiar with, like Singular Point and like the anime trilogy that came out. And with Shin Godzilla, like it's nice that he can go back. He can mean something still. It's he's versatile. It reaffirms that Godzilla's versatile as a character.
Right.
In that, like you can still have this cool design, this cool creature, and he can be cool, but he can also mean stuff when he needs to mean stuff, and he can be a superhero when he has to be a superhero. Just as a movie and as a character, I was like, I always viewed this is an update to the 1954
Mhm.
original movie. Like as strange as Godzilla looks in this movie, in the sense that he's got these weird red pulsating things going over, like he walks like the 1954 Godzilla. He holds his arms out like the 1954 Godzilla. Like there's so many sound effects. I said this when we were watching it. It was like a lot of this music right now, a lot of these sound effects. This is from the original movie back in the 50s.
Right.
And so it really felt like a throwback to like that movie that even though Minus One is also kind of trying to do that, this movie I actually feel like is more in line with the 1954 movie, which I don't mean that in a bad way for people who are listening. I mean that like in a good way. It's just stylistically, like that's just how I kind of feel about this movie. It's so unique, and I'm actually kind of glad we didn't get a sequel to it. I like that it
Yeah.
stands on its own. I like that the ending is so open ended, and it doesn't actually have closure. And I like that it exists in its own little world. I did tell you off before we started recording that there's actually three different Shin movies, for lack of a better term. There's Shin Ultraman and Shin Kamen Rider or Shin Master Rider. While they are not directly tied to Godzilla, they're kind of similar in tone and feel and vibe. And I'm glad we got this like little Shin universe as well. Um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I can't say enough good things about this movie. I think it came along in a weird window of time where I think I think there was only like a limited window of time where Toho could do a live action Japanese Godzilla movie. I think because of contractual obligations with Legendary Warner Brothers. I don't think that's like fully sussed out, but I think that's kind of way the way the story goes. And I don't know. I'm glad we got it because like um, it certainly revitalized Godzilla quite a bit, and led to a lot of what we have now. And like we are living in probably peak Godzilla times right now.
Do you think that was a tee up for Minus One?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think if Shin Godzilla wasn't the Shin Godzilla showed that you can have two different universes, or I shouldn't say universes, but like you can have the MonsterVerse, and then you can kind of have Toho's own unique takes on Godzilla with like I mean, maybe you would enjoy it. Like Singular Point is an anime series that's on Netflix. I mean it's drastically different from this. I mean first it's a series, not a movie, but there's a lot of like physics and time travel involved, and a lot of
I'm
like
in.
it's very
Aliens? Say aliens.
I don't think there's any no, but it's very
I'll take time travel. That's fine.
yeah, it's very physics-based time travel with like a lot of like True Detective season 1 vibes to it.
Ooh, all right. I'm in.
Yeah. It's a slow burn, but like it's one of those things that like um when you watch like it's a big mystery that unravels over the course of I think it's 12 episodes, and I love it. I can't get enough of it.
Interesting.
But then we also got like another anime trilogy created by Forcing Godzilla, where it's like Godzilla's like a stand-in for like cosmic horror and existential dread. And it's like I love we just get all these different takes.
Yeah.
The anime trilogy
We're-
is very controversial.
Versatile being, versatile character. All right, my last question for you in this series of questions, not necessarily the last one from the podcast. What's your favorite moment in Shin Godzilla?
Oh, it's the atomic breath scene. Of course. That's like
easily mine as well. I was waiting for you to ask me
mine. Yeah. Well, we're gonna get there.
And I was unabashedly gonna go with the clear choice of that. I mean, how that's cool
probably
is that?
That could be probably the greatest moment in a Godzilla movie of all time.
I mean,
it's so well done.
That is, I mean, how many? Call that 20 seconds to 30 seconds, maybe, of that film. That was, you heard me. You heard me saying it.
Yeah.
I was a child.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, that's look at it. I mean, that's that couldn't have been better executed, in my opinion.
I mean, when I think of like, even if you did like top 3 Godzilla moments of all time, I mean, I think everybody would probably put that in the top 3. It's like, it's funny when you think about like the lasting impact of like Godzilla 98, the Matthew Broderick Godzilla movie, kind of had, because like Godzilla didn't have an atomic breath in that movie. And so I remember when
just had a bunch of babies.
He did, which then gave us a. Did you know there's a cartoon that continues the story of Godzilla 98? It's fantastic.
Is it really?
Oh, it's really good. And also, if you want a little piece of trivia, Xander from 90210, he plays Matthew Broderick's character in the cartoon. He voices Matthew Broderick's character in the cartoon. but because he didn't have an atomic breath in the 1998 movie, I remember when the 2014 movie was coming out, everyone's like, is he going to have an atomic breath? He's going to have an atomic breath. And I don't know if you remember, but like, there's a big build-up to him firing his atomic breath in that movie.
That's the Bryan Cranston version.
The Bryan Cranston one, yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember if I saw that. We saw the 2019
I think you did.
version.
I think you've told me in the past that you.
I think I did. It needs a rewatch though.
But when the Shin Godzilla trailer dropped, you didn't see Godzilla fire his atomic breath, and I still remember there was a bunch of online discourse going like, "Is he going to have his atomic breath or not?"
Good on them for not putting it in the trailer.
Because everybody was still reeling from the fact that the 1998 Godzilla movie, even though there was like 6 movies where Godzilla fires his atomic breath, came out post that, there was still a concern of like, was he going to have his atomic breath or not? And actually, when the second trailer drops, it ends with his mouth going wide and starting to glow purple, but you don't actually see the beam come out. And so like, it was like they were like purposely teasing what he was going to have. Now, granted, his atomic breath is drastically different in this movie than it is in other movies.
Yeah, I'm trying to. So, lay person, again, that's me. Prior Godzilla movies, he had the atomic breath with more of a wider kind of beam.
Always a big blue
beam. This was a very kind of like laser thing slicing through buildings,
right?
Which I thought was, I mean, back to that awesome scene of the kind of progression of snake-like jaw unhinging, bottom jaw kind of bifurcating into 2 different directions. And how does it starts with some
fire, breath, then it gets tighter and tighter,
and tighter, and that moment that it changes from fire into that kind of nuclear or whatever you want to call it thing. It's just so well executed, and it feels real.
So also it's purple in this movie where normally it's blue, and so in 1995, prior to when the 80s and 90s Godzilla timeline ends, it's Godzilla versus Destroyer. Destroyer fires a purple beam that looks very similar to this, and the sound effect that they used in this movie was the same sound effect that Destroyer used when he fired his beam in 1995.
See, this is why people tune in. I mean, they might already know.
They might already know that. So, but it's a nice callback. It's a nice like, but also like. But I mean, doesn't be telling you that? Like, oh, there's a lot going on here.
There is, and that's clearly like, even if you're an outsider, you can't help but respect the body of work over time, and and the callbacks to there's a whole plethora of Godzilla stuff, content.
So I think we are. Winding down here, so let me ask you a few.
Sure.
Or did you have any more questions for me?
No, unless they arise.
Sure. So, is this is what I said to you over text? Is this a good movie, or is this a good Godzilla movie?
I'd call it a good movie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I think there's one perspective that if you zone out of Godzilla a little bit and focus on everything else going on, Godzilla, in that sense, is a kind of just a bit of a mechanism for some broader thing happening and impacting, their culture and how it. I mean, the movie really focuses on the response to it. Would it be as good of a movie if Godzilla wasn't such a badass creature that was that mechanism? Probably not, but still a good movie.
Right. If it's like some like that's actually an interesting point. I didn't really think of that. Like if it's not Godzilla, right? And it's like some like trying to think what was that like not Key and Peele. Yeah, Peele from Key and Peele, right? Didn't he just do that movie with like the big weird octopus thing like in the sky? Nope. That movie.
Oh yeah,
Let's say it's not. Let's say it's not that. Let's just say it's like some like kind of like off-screen, not Godzilla, just like some generic monster.
Sure.
Is this movie as good? And I think maybe to your point, no, maybe not.
I'm gonna go. I'll take the. I'll stick on.
That's no knock and note, by the way. I think I haven't seen it, but that seems like a very good fucked up movie.
Yeah, some cool concepts going on there. As big advocate for aliens being real,
like the aliens.
Yeah, I'm gonna tether myself to the camp of no. I mean, this is not really a hot take. Without Godzilla, would this movie be as good? No, that's not a very hot take.
Yeah.
But it would still be a good movie. But Godzilla is just Godzilla generates a kind of a feeling and that kind of bit of like it brings out a little kid feeling of like whoa, right? There's always a whoa factor when you see Godzilla. That's great. I think as an adult, the rest of it, the political commentary, the work life, that sort of thing, it's good and relevant. It gives you stuff to think about and analyze and formulate your kind of take on. But Godzilla is that's the draw. Let's be real.
So you've already said a couple of times that you now want to see Godzilla -1. I showed you the trailer. I showed you this, but I've also told you that there's like a Shin trilogy with Shin Ultraman and Shin Kamen Rider or Shin Master Rider. Do you have just on that limited description? Do you now have same team has worked on all these movies? Granted, the roles have shifted a little bit, but overall, same team. Do you have an interest in seeing? You don't have to watch them in any order, but do you have an interest in seeing those movies, perhaps, or exploring, maybe themes in style that's been done here in those movies?
I'm certainly open-minded to it.
This is me trying to sell you when watching Shin Kamen Rider.
You send me a link. Yeah,
it's on Amazon Prime. You can rent it.
Yeah,
for free, or it's included your Prime. Shin Ultraman is also very good, but I think you would really like, Shin Kamen Rider or Master Rider, however you want to call it. But
yeah, so keep in mind before I answer this question that what
you don't know what it is.
I don't know what any of that really is. And it could be great or it could not be great, and so whatever answer I give is just purely speculative. What I will say, how I'll choose to answer that question is that I'm more jacked up on Godzilla now than I ever have been, and each time I left the last Godzilla movie we saw in theaters in 2019.
Yeah, King of the Monsters. Yeah.
Feeling that same way. And again, my critique on that movie, not to take us a whole different direction, but was the fact that, 11, for lack of a better, for forgetting her real name.
Yeah. Millie Bobby Brown.
Yes. Yeah. No disrespect to the actress. I think she's quite good.
Well, I don't remember. I kept calling the dude Loki from the Marvel movies.
Sure.
Because I don't remember anybody's name.
I'm going to go ahead and assume that nobody's offended by me calling her 11. It was that piece to it and her character and some of the drama stuff going on there. I found myself just wanting to repel away, like just get it out of stop.
Yeah.
I don't care. And again, it's the American side of things. Will America and Hollywood ever be able to divorce itself from the character centric take on Godzilla? I don't know.
So you've not seen Godzilla Kong New Empire? You've seen Godzilla vs. Kong during COVID.
I don't think I have seen that movie.
Well, it just came out.
No, that I haven't. No, that I haven't.
So in that movie, they were pretty much just like, we're going to have people in this for the purposes of moving some stuff along.
Yeah.
But this is all about Godzilla and Kong.
I would
And,
be.
like,
I think
It's very popcorn. I loved it. I thought it was great
Yeah.
and entertaining. It's not this movie. It's
Yeah.
not -1. But
Right.
but that doesn't make it better or worse or whatever. They're just different, right? It's just like it gives you that, like, I think you would like it. I mean, I pre-ordered the Blu-ray. I'm gonna have it like in 2 weeks. Like, and it's just like you have some holdover characters from Godzilla versus Kong, which I thought was very, very light on human characters. They were pretty much just like, all right, we're just kind of here to get Godzilla and Kong together, and then they're going to fight and they're going to do stuff. This movie is even more like that, except Godzilla and Kong are like now, like, they're like a buddy cop. It's like Lethal Weapon 3. It's like what it is. Like, now they are like buddies that like barely get along, but they get to like be like tag team partners against bigger threats. And it's just straight up just like, I mean, the movie fucking starts, not to like spoil anything for you, but like the movie starts basically with like Godzilla getting into a fight and then sleeping in the Colosseum in Rome like a cat in a cat bed. Like, it's just leaning into what it's
well,
it's Fast and the Furious now. That's great. That's fantastic.
Right.
I love it.
And I'm in full support of let's pendulum swing movie to movie and try different things and find yourself somewhere in that spectrum of things.
There's a Godzilla for everybody. That's what I say.
I think back to like the night again. I'm gonna before I go here, I'm gonna reference back to the 1933 King Kong movie that made an impact on me as a kid, being what it was. And if I recall in that movie, I mean, the whole start of that movie was King Kong existing on his
island, yeah.
With these dinosaurs, and it approached the movie from a King Kong centric point of view, not a human centric.
Once he appears, yeah, I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, it's been a long time, but that's what
it really holds up. Like, the effects, I think you would probably appreciate them even more now.
Yeah,
it's like
yeah,
it's really like, I mean, it's really, really, especially like, so. Like the famous scene, right? Kong fights the meat eater T-Rex,
right,
or whatever they were calling it back then. Like, and like all that stuff on Skull Island is like so well done, and like the effects, like and especially when you know the work that goes into it behind the scenes, like
right.
It's really a style of like stop motion in the 80s wasn't as good as it was in the 30s when Willis O'Brien was doing it. Willis O'Brien is the person behind King Kong. He was the person who did the stop motion, and then it goes on to be Ray Harryhausen in the 50s, who was his understudy.
Look at you.
Listen, I'm telling you, like, if you watch works by Willis O'Brien and Ray Harryhausen, like, you watch that stop motion and you compare it to modern day effects, I think you would appreciate, like, you would say, this is extremely good. Extremely good. And it holds up. Well, so with that, I am glad you enjoyed. Do you have anything you want to promote? Do you want to drop, like, your LinkedIn here or anything like that?
No, not at all.
No?
Not at all. I'm a promotionless. Just I'm just happy to be here and out of the house.
This was very good. This is very good, and I think one of our other mutual friends is already agreed to join me for when -1 comes out. But I actually think it'd be good to have you join him and I as well when -1 comes out. I think you would really enjoy it.
The immediate invite back.
I didn't think you're gonna take this as much.
Feels like nailing an interview.
This was like I said, I did not think you were gonna have. You had a much more positive response to this movie than I thought. I guess that's probably the way I always kind of feel when I'm watching Godzilla movies with somebody who's not big into Godzilla. I don't know where it's gonna go, but you had a much more positive response than I thought, and I thought that was that's probably a testament to Shin Godzilla and how good it is.
Yeah, and a bit of a testament to just Godzilla just being cool. And if you, from a distance, as somebody that's not doesn't stay fully informed and in the loop, Godzilla is just so cool. And some movies definitely better than others. I remember '98 Godzilla, walking out of that and just being like, that was very American. But yeah, Shin Godzilla.
What are you talking about? I have all the Taco Bell merchandise that comes with it.
I'm just no disrespect to American Godzillas, but this one had a feel that was I enjoyed every minute of it. I thought it was very well done. I'm continuing to digest and ruminate.
You'll be thinking about it for days.
I'm just going to be pontificating on Shin Godzilla.
We're pontificating.
I am. That's why you brought me in here.
That's why you're here. Great pontificate.
Right? And that's why your audience has tolerated me being on your podcast today. My pontification.
Well, with that, See you, Mikey.
Thanks for having me, y'all.
Well, that was a dandy of a time. I want to thank my good friend Mikey Aliens for joining me in this episode, and I thought it was a really fun conversation. I thought it was really interesting to see what he took away from this movie. And yeah, I just had a really good time doing that with my friend, and I look forward to hopefully having him back on in the future. And I hope to have some more of my friends on as I do more episodes with this sort of theme. So with that, I think this episode has been long enough. So I'm just going to leave you till next time. So once again, it's your pal, your buddy. Did y'all just hear my Alexa go off? I'm going to leave that in. That was kind of fun. So till next time, it's been your buddy Slick, and I hope you have a good one. See ya.